Welcome to this series of reflections on the fundamental realities of human life, titled A Temple of Thoughts. In this video, we examine something mysterious right at the beginning of the biblical narrative. We read in the 4th chapter of Genesis that Cain and his brother Abel went together to offer their sacrifices to God or make their offerings to God. God accepted Abel's offering and rejected Cain's offering. This provoked Cain, who then murdered his brother, which is the first recorded murder in the biblical narrative. And it's particularly noteworthy that this murder takes place in the context of a worship. It's a worshipper who becomes a murderer. As a consequence of this, God punishes, as the biblical narrative tells us, with this fate of being an eternal wanderer, eternal and insecure wanderer on the face of the earth. In this video, we make an attempt to understand this particular aspect of the human predicament, the predicament of being restless wanderers. The important thing to remember here is that there is a Cain quotient, or the element of Cain, or the spirit of Cain within each one of us. We are in the line not of Abel, the righteous man, the blemishless man who was killed. We are in the line of Cain, the wanderer, the restless one. And therefore, it makes sense that we have a need to understand what this predicament really involves. And we are going to make an effort in the direction. Now, why was Cain's offering not accepted by God? Cain offered his worship to God in order to secure God's favor. Abel, it's only an inference to make, the biblical text does not state it in detail. Abel made an offering in order to express his blemishless adoration of God. Now, in Cain's religiosity, which has become the paradigm of human religiosity ever since the time of Cain, worship is a sort of transaction. God is related to in order to what one can get out of him. And Cain decided to kill Abel because of his murderously covetous disposition. His logic would have been that if Abel could be out of his way, Cain could monopolize the blessings of God. If God has no one else to bless, now that Abel is killed, then crude human logic dictates or implies that Cain would be the sole owner or the privileged enjoyer of God's blessings. Now, in this process, the irony is that in his effort to monopolize or in his effort to gather to himself the whole of God's blessing, Cain commits himself to a violent, murderous relationship with God. And in this process, he violates the very nature of God. So, Cain's greed leads him to a position of practical atheism, at least a practical rebellion against the nature of God, though his intention is to acquire and monopolize the blessings of God. Now, in this process, what happens is Cain detaches himself from the being of God. God is the whole of everything. God is the complete the total reality, both visible and invisible, both present and for all ages to come, the given and for all ages to come, the totality of everything. So what happens is, the logic of his expulsion, even if God were not to expel him from the Garden of Eden and make him the eternal wanderer, he would still have become so. The reason being, with this act, he has actually plucked himself away from his living contact with God, the living communion with the whole of everything, the fullness of everything. God is a symbol of the wholeness of everything. So now, by choice, Cain is able to relate only to a part. Of course, he can cultivate the land. Of course, he can gather the yields. But his sense of wholeness is gone. The principle is like this: the more exclusively and intensely you attach yourself to a part of life, the more you are alienated from the whole of life. I repeat that very important principle. The more exclusively and intensely you attach yourself to a part of reality, a part of life, the more you get alienated from the whole of reality and the whole of life. So then what happens? For a person who relates to the world, to God, to fellow human beings, to reality, to possibilities in the world, this state of being alienated from the whole and being confined to the part has chosen himself in preference to the whole, begins to make him feel suffocated, at least deeply disappointed. This pattern is writ large over every choice that we make. For example, when a new make of a particular phone is announced in the market, suddenly everyone who bought the last year's model with great passion, excitement and a sense of pride in ownership begin to feel totally disenchanted. And now they are restless, and until they get hold of the new version of the phone, they will remain restless. So they will somehow go and buy the new model, but that is not their resting point. Next year, a new version, yet another new version will come in the market. And precisely when that new version is announced, they will feel disenchanted, deeply disenchanted with the phone, which was a point of enchantment for them for a year. So it goes on like this. I call this mobile phone promiscuity. Mobile phone promiscuity. The incapacity of human beings to stay with a particular model, even though that model fully meets all your requirements. It's not for any practical reason that somebody is desperate to get the latest version of the market, as everybody knows. But unless and until the new model is got, the person feels restless. That's a very, very clear illustration. Is a parallel to what happens to life in general, or attitude in general. This very attitude is then repeated in man-woman relationships. This is the reason why, where freedom of choice is feasible, promiscuity is rampant in man-woman relationships, because you're always disenchanted with the given. Why are you disenchanted with the given? For two reasons. One, because the person you relate to is a product of this particular world view, this particular scheme of things. That person does not represent the whole to which you belong through that individual. That person, or himself or herself, is cut off from the whole. It's only a small fragment. Secondly, the problem does not end there. Secondly, that person, after having cut himself or herself off from the whole, then begins to relate or realize only to a part of what one or who one is. No one knows and no one relates to the whole of one's own personality. So it is a fragment of a fragment and a very small and pathetic fragment at that. Then surely it makes sense that the relationship between two such fragments breeds restlessness. It's inevitable. And therefore, if you as young people, and I'm addressing young people in particular in this video, if you as young people want stability in your relationship, man-woman relationship, husband-wife relationship, which is the backbone of society, so it's a backbone of civilization, if you like, that's important, a subject we are dealing with, then it's important that you situate your love and your relationship on the foundation of wholeness, WHOLENESS. How does one do that? The only way, since the fall of human beings, individuals can stay in communion with the whole is by abiding in God through Jesus Christ, or through any other mode, authentic. If it is Godhead, it has to be authentic. A fake or a substitute will not do. Something that passes for God will not do. There's only one genuine God, one true God, living God. It's only when we find, or rather only when we rediscover ourselves through our relationship with God, that we become rooted in the whole. And our personality, our being is healed of this disease, the universal epidemic of restlessness. And we become capable of settling down to an enduring relationship. Now, if a man and a woman enters into a relationship which is outside of this discipline, or a relationship which is situated on what is partial and perishable, then it makes sense that soon disenchantment creeps into their relationship. And they try to relieve this ache, this existential ache, by resorting to whatever strategies available to them to add variety to that experience, which is always sought outside the integrity of the relationship. So, but unfortunately what happens is that in this process, a person drags himself from one part to another part to another part to another part. And the more he does so, the more he gets alienated from himself. So he begins to shrink progressively. He becomes less and less and less of himself. And the partners to whom he relates also are in the same process of shrinking themselves. So it is a shrunken version of the self, which is already a part of the whole, that is now relating to shrunken versions of the parts of the whole. Therefore, it makes perfect logic that such relationships are an inwardly spiraling model of inevitable disenchantment. Ultimately, people settle down like defeated human beings and decide to live with their frustration. But that doesn't mean that they have discovered the enduring stability of their relationship. Then it becomes a matter of fact arrangement in which certain practical advantages are recognized and valued. The so-called partners of life do not value each other. They simply recognize the value or the convenience of relating to each other, and they decide to stay together, not because they are in a relationship, but because they are in a predicament. I repeat, not because they are in a relationship, but because they are in a predicament. So, there is a logic to the rootless existence of human beings. Here I am also referring to that novel of the title Roots. Modern man is rootless, not ruthless. Of course, rootless man also becomes ruthless man. That goes without saying. But fundamentally, in modern societies, individuals are in a state of rootlessness. Therefore, they are in a state of perpetual wandering. They are in a state of unending restlessness, and that takes its own toll on human beings. And unfortunately, the tragedy is that in this process, everyone lives cheated of a satisfying, self-nourishing or life-nourishing relationship. Ultimately, most human beings on planet Earth are living in terrifying aloneness. They try to cover it up, but the fact is that it takes a toll on them, and that's one of the reasons why even young people these days are victims of boredom and depression, particularly depression, because life punishes them. Life has its own logic. Life can exist only in wholeness. You cannot slice life into convenient pieces and relate to it. Either you relate to life in its totality or you don't relate to life at all. And if you don't relate to life at all, because you are a product of life, because you are a manifestation of life, life punishes you in its own way. And that punishment is in the universal form of aloneness, the incapacity to relate to life. And that's the heart of aloneness. And as a consequence or a byproduct of that, the incapacity to relate to other people in a state of fullness. Now, please don't misunderstand. Social interactions, no matter how glibly, how outwardly cheerfully they are entered into and sustained, amount to true relationships, or they give you a sense of wholeness. In fact, the more you lead a social life, the more inwardly empty you could become. And that's particularly true of fashionable elite societies, wherein people live entirely in terms of appearances. Members of such networks are consumers of outward appearances or images. They do not relate to inner realities, and in fact, they are exiles from the sanctuary of inner life. And that's the ultimate punishment. The greatest curse in life is that one is exiled from the sanctuary of one's own being. A person becomes wholly an outward show and nothing more. So in such a state, it makes sense, and it's in fact inevitable that people become eternal, restless wanderers on the face of the earth. You may have a great mansion, you have all the facilities to yourself, but in those mansions you live as pockets of restlessness, an item, an amoeba, so to speak, or a pulsating point of restlessness. You never know peace and fulfillment in your life. You have everything except one thing, and that's fulfillment, which means you have really nothing. So this is the condemnation of our species, and the more culture gets elaborated, the more people attach themselves to smaller and smaller things, the more people opt for the seeming and seductive convenience of relating to life in part, and that too in a partial way, the more this restlessness will escalate, intensify, making it seem impossible for many people who otherwise have comfortable or promising circumstances to believe that they can lead a meaningful life. And that manifests itself in the increasing rate of suicide, and that rate of suicide increases proportionate to the increase in the affluence of a society, as Emil Durkheim proved in that classic study on suicide published a couple of 100 years ago. So yes, it is important to recognize that we are in the line of Cain, not of Abel, and Cain was condemned to be an eternal restless wanderer on the face of the earth, and therefore we carry the Cain element or the Cain quotient, or if you like, the Cain gene in each one of us. We are potentially wanderers on the face of the earth, but through Jesus Christ we are given the option to enter into life in its fullness. And certainly one authentication of the fact that we have entered or we are oriented in the direction of life in its fullness is that we enjoy stability of relationship, which is the exact opposite of promiscuity in indulgence. Every form of promiscuity is a sign, a symptom of restlessness. It's only too obvious, it does not have to be argued. But it's important for young people in particular to recognize the spiritual logic of this state, which is universal, and to ensure that one does not fall into this bottomless abyss. And if you do not heed the wisdom of God and you allow yourself to slip into this bylane of or dark alley of death, gradual death, then you will be cheated of your life and you will be deprived, you will be robbed of the very great privileges of entering into relationships that are enduring and enriching. And you will be fooled ultimately of the potential for life in all its fullness. And as a result of this, one begins to experience life as a burden, which is either endured in a kind of grudging, resentful manner or terminated, depending on how acute the sense of futile, meaningless restlessness and the burden of that restlessness the individual experiences. The greatest burden in life, as Viktor Frankl argues in his very famous work, Man's Search for Meaning, is the burden of meaninglessness. As he very clearly states in that book, if an individual knows the why of things, the why of life, he can endure almost anything in the world. It is very true. But in order to know the why of life, you have to relate to the whole of it. For example, if you want to understand the meaning of a book, if you want to understand the meaning of a sentence, you have to relate to the whole of the sentence. You can't read a couple of words from a sentence which is 2 lines long or 3 lines long and say, well, I have understood the meaning of it. No, you have not understood the meaning. You have understood maybe the meaning of a couple of words, which you understood anyway, even before you read that sentence. You have not read the sentence. You have read only 2 words. Those 2 words could exist anywhere. And by understanding the meanings of 2 words in a sentence, you don't understand the meaning of the sentence. And therefore, there is no question of being involved with the text that you are reading. Therefore, what happens? Suppose you take up a book and then you read 2 words of every sentence. I tell you, you cannot read more than 1 page. Whereas, if you take the most engaging of all books, say a novel by Dickens or Dostoevsky or whatever, classics, works that can actually hold you spellbound. Now open the book, first page, beginning of every sentence, 2 words, then go on and on. I tell you, before you complete the first sentence, you will be completely bored and you cannot go to the next page. Whereas, if you read being engaged with the full text, full sentence, sentence after sentence after sentence, then you will progressively forget yourself. There is no question of burden or restlessness. And that's precisely what I'm arguing in this. I plead with you to realize the logic of what has been included in this video. And this is of particular significance to young people. It's relevant to the predicament of every human being, irrespective of which stage in life you are, but it's acutely relevant to the predicament of young people, because youth is, if it's not properly managed, the phase in life which is more prone to the sort of restlessness and the many aberrations that could be generated thereof or thereby. So there we are. Do not forget Cain, because there is a Cain hiding in each one of us. But it's not merely a Cain who should be part of our story. There is also the Lord Jesus Christ, who is the new Abel. Why has Jesus Christ come as the new Abel? To help us maintain an equilibrium between the pull of Cain and the stability of Abel. And our life can therefore maintain its equilibrium, provided we look to the Lord Jesus Christ, who is the author and finisher of our faith. And as the writer of Hebrews says, realizing that there is a great cloud of witness that surrounds us, let's run with diligence the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. So the logic of that is also included in the logic that I've tried to explain so far. That's the logic, unfortunately, of being eternal restless wanderers. The opposite of being restless wanderers on the face of the earth is not vegetating in a state of stagnation. That's the most important thing to realize. The only alternative is, the only viable, meaningful, life-enriching alternative is to be the sprinters. But sprinters with a clear-cut sense of destination and discipline, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. So two completely different states. One is aimless wanderer. The other is being a sprinter. A sprinter is distinguished for a sharp, unwavering sense of purpose. If you don't have that clear, godly sense of purpose, which heals life of all its divisions and inadequacies, you cannot escape being, in the tradition of Cain, the meaningless, restless, eternal wanderers on the face of the earth. It's a tragic thing. It's a lamentable thing. It's not happened to any person, any young person in this world. And it's out of that concern that I have chosen to share these insights with you. And I hope and pray that you would listen to this video a second time, reflectively, prayerfully, trying to absorb the meaning of what has been revealed through the light of the text in the book of Genesis, that is chapter 4 of the book of Genesis. Please read the chapter as well, so that what I say becomes clearer, and then you will see that the wisdom of God is a precondition for building, enduring, life-enriching, fulfilling, fruitful relationships, and that's my wish and prayer for each one of you. God bless you.